The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
We've been talking about different problems in, within, and surrounding the Supreme Court of the United States for many years, and there's very few polls that we've discussed that give us a sense of what the public view is about the Supreme Court. We now have one, and the information that we can glean from it is fascinating. An overwhelming majority of voters would actually support significant reforms to the Supreme Court. Trust and confidence in the Supreme Court has continued to erode in recent years, and according to a new survey by the Democratic-aligned firm Greenberg Quinlan Rosner, there is actually a movement, there is actually an interest among Americans in term limiting Supreme Court justices. And I have to tell you, Lewis, I completely agree with this. If we think about the reason why Supreme Court justices are not elected, right? They are appointed rather than elected. That actually does make sense, right? We wouldn't want those who are interpreting the law to be influenced by the upcoming re-election campaign that they may have to run. So I completely agree with that. However, the idea that the Supreme Court justices are somehow completely independent, we've talked about stories involving Antonin Scalia and Clarence Thomas and his wife, and so many other issues within the Supreme Court. The idea that because they aren't elected, we have this truly independent judiciary that is not in any way tied in with political fundraisers and other conflicts of interest is ridiculous. And I would completely support term limiting Supreme Court justices. And Lewis, and this would also eliminate this game that's played in terms of timing retirements so that the president in office can replace you with someone that would be advantageous. We could get rid of this entire thing, or at least a lot of it, with term limits.
We could. We also agree that there should be term limits for Congress, but we also agree that there should be more members of Congress. And I would say the same thing about the Supreme Court. Perhaps there should be more justices on the court.
Big majorities in this GQR poll said the Supreme Court justices should no longer be appointed for life, that cameras should be allowed in the courtroom, absolutely, and that justices should disclose financial conflicts of interest, absolutely. There was a 60-36 spread by which those surveyed said that Supreme Court justices were more likely to be carrying out a personal or political agenda than to be simply working to render fair and impartial verdicts. This is just obvious stuff. And if you say, well, it's a it's a poll conducted by a Democratic-leaning pollster, I would say, well, then it seems to be only Republicans that are disproportionately blinded to these realities in the Supreme Court. I don't know how anybody could argue that these are not the realities of the Supreme Court today.
They definitely are. It's a terrible state of affairs. It needs to change, but it's going to be an uphill battle, just like the change we need in Congress. How do you really fix the system if everyone who is part of the system is happy with it?
I've been saying for a while that net neutrality, or so-called open internet versus closed internet issues, are absolutely paramount to so much of what is going to happen in the political system going forward. The internet has been one of the biggest equalizers when it comes to the dissemination of information and alternative views. And much of the discussion around net neutrality relates to whether or not internet service providers should be considered so-called common carriers, similar to telephone companies, and therefore are open to be regulated in the same way. Of course, the internet service providers themselves argue that they should not be classified as common carriers. Mozilla thinks that it may have found a way to ensure network neutrality without a requirement to go back and reclassify broadband carriers as common carriers. Mozilla filed a petition with the FCC this week, which asked the FCC to recognize that in addition to the relationship that exists between the internet service provider and the end user, you sitting at home watching Netflix or whatever the case may be, that's one relationship that is being discussed quite a bit when it comes to issues of net neutrality. That there's a separate relationship between the internet service provider and that entity that is providing or hosting the data, video, or information, and that relationship can actually be regulated under the 1996 Telecommunications Act. Instead of saying that the internet service provider simply has a duty to deliver all packets of data over its pipes, for lack of a better term, to the consumer without discrimination, Mozilla is saying that there's another legal obligation, which is that the ISP owes to content providers to deliver their packets in a neutral manner. This may seem like a small nuance or detail, Lewis, but this is huge because it would actually allow the FCC to do whatever it wants on the consumer side, which of course we're still concerned with, but without ISPs as common carriers, based on the 1996 Telecommunications Act, would have to treat the provider data without discrimination. Lewis, am I doing a clear enough job of explaining what this fundamental difference is here? Do you get what I'm saying?
I do. I think it makes sense, and I think this is massively important. If it's a shame that it needs to come down to these tiny legal details, but this is very, very important. I hope this goes through because I think we're a long way away from actually labeling these ISPs as what were they called? As
common carriers. Yeah, you're right. That's carriers, a big uphill battle. To put it another way, the distinction that Mozilla is making is that instead of only having a duty to the end user, be it a residential user, a business user, whatever, once a content provider's traffic hits the ISP's network, the ISP has a duty to deliver the content provider's traffic in a neutral manner. I think that this is an absolutely great point here. This would, of course, if it is determined to be actionable by the FCC and by the judiciary, there are going to be there's going to be a deluge of lawsuits over this. Of course, ISPs, which presumably exist to allow the transfer of data. Oh, wait, no, actually, they exist just as profit centers. We should have learned that by now. They're going to sue, and this could lead to a decade-long legal battle. But at least Mozilla is thinking proactively here about what is already in the law that might further reinforce a free and open internet, which I think is important, Lewis, because as you said, to create new law around this, the laws have lagged behind when it comes to internet usage for so long. And if we can find an existing legal basis to protect an open internet, we can't even measure the positive effect of that. I mean, it's just huge.
It might be one of the most important things facing this country. The little people aren't going to win this one, David. It takes a big corporation to beat another big corporation. We need the Mozillas, the Googles, and the Apples behind us on this one to win this battle.
Probably worth mentioning, just for context, Lewis, that Tom Wheeler is the former head of the cable lobby. A cable lobbyist is now running the FCC. Money in politics, never forget that that's always there. On Friday, Vermont became the first state to call for a convention to amend the U.S. Constitution to reverse the Citizens United decision, which allowed for this huge flood of money into politics. And the U.S. Constitution can be amended only through an act of Congress ratified by the states or by a convention of the states acting on their own. It would take 34 states to trigger a convention to propose amendments to the Constitution and 38 states to approve an amendment. Is there another way to reverse Citizens United that wouldn't require, I mean, this is great, right, that Vermont is doing this, but there is still this huge hill to climb. To call it a hill is a huge understatement. There is a towering mountain to climb. Well, there are legal challenges, but that's not really a likely solution. The Supreme Court has already set precedent in a number of these cases that say, hey, free speech, money, it's exactly the same thing. So that's not really looking too good. Vermont is pushing their own single-payer healthcare proposal. They are now pushing for a constitutional convention. We don't know what will happen with these issues ultimately, but Vermont, for being such a tiny state with a small population, is really making pretty significant waves here.
Vermont is doing some great stuff. I think they're kind of on the cutting edge. Unfortunately, how long is it until the single-payer healthcare goes into effect?
I don't remember exactly, and we should actually update that story. I know what you're saying, though, Lewis, which is that proposals alone don't necessarily lead to action. And when we look at we need 34 or 38 states to do what Vermont has done,
Right.
I mean, it's completely disheartening. Can this really happen, you know?
Unfortunately, I think the problem here might be with the Constitution itself as a whole. I think maybe we should be looking at that. But
Lewis, hold on a second. That's incredibly disrespectful to those who for whom the Constitution is their religion and they pray at the altar of the Constitution. Everybody knows that a document written hundreds of years ago is completely relevant in modern society, even though society has changed in ways that could never have been foreseen hundreds of years ago. It is an insult to suggest that anything about the Constitution may need revision.
Hey, call it blasphemy, David, but perhaps we need to rework the whole thing.
Sam Stein has a really interesting and disturbing article in Huffington Post. We've talked about the anti-science movement that has been pervading much of our society over recent years. Much of this comes in the way of questioning scientific research, offering alternative religious explanations for natural phenomena, rewriting classroom textbooks, pushing anti-science sentiment in churches, creating false balance on corporate media debates when there is a scientific consensus. Climate change is a good example. There is now concern from the scientific community that there may be an escalation coming in the fight against science that is going to be significantly more aggressive than what we've seen. And the idea here is to simply cut off science funding to the so-called theories that are being created by liberal activist scientists, Lewis. And this would make it much easier to counter science. And the way this would work is through a Republican bill in the House called the Frontiers in Innovation, Research, Science, and Technology Act. Now, when you hear that, Lewis, it sounds much like the Clear Skies Act, right? It sounds very positive, very futuristic, very pro-science.
It does. It sounds great.
Unfortunately, the bill would restrict how funds are distributed by the National Science Foundation. The goal, according to Republicans, the goal is that we want to weed out projects that have a cost that cannot be justified or whose sociological purpose is not apparent. Of course, the obvious question is whose cost can't be justified according to what group and whose sociological purpose is not apparent based on whose values. And when you ask those questions, Lewis, it becomes very obvious what the goal is here. And Republicans will say, no, this is all about those individual things that we point to. It's about, I don't know, spending X amount of money to study Bronze Age relics in southeastern India, right? That's not a good use of funding. Republicans will tell you it's about curtailing spending on those studies, but the reality here is that this would open up the door to pushing a significantly anti-science agenda. And this is just a disaster because we can deal with, it's annoying, right? It's annoying to deal with creationists pushing back at the scientific theories presented by Neil deGrasse Tyson and Cosmos. It's annoying, but we can push back against that if we defund the studies themselves, if we defund the ability to do scientific research. It's going to be a whole different ball game, Lewis.
Oh, right. And we can talk about, I'm sure you will see the defunding of science education in classrooms and you name it. Sky's the limit, if you will.
This is a further push towards not only anti-intellectualism, which has become very popular among the right in the United States, but it's also a push to replace science with religious doctrine, as if they're all kind of equally valid.
Right. That's something, unfortunately, we have to fight against. You can call it a war on Christmas. You can call it a war on religion. But we do have to push back. We do have to fight back. Otherwise, we're going to fall into religious fundamentalism quagmire.
Yeah, are we looking to get back into a period of society where we see absolutely no progress for decades or even centuries? I mean, is that really what we're looking to do? I know conservative means to conserve and progressive means to progress, but this seems like it's taking it a little bit too far. We will, of course, tackle that issue in one way, shape, or form in today's Hatriot Mail, which is coming up next.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
You can support this program with your Amazon.com shopping by going to our website, davidpakman.com, and simply clicking on the Amazon banner on the right side of the website. Use that link whenever you shop and you'll help to support our program. We're also supported by our membership program, made possible in part by liberalbias.com. When reality doesn't live up to right-wing ideals, there's only one explanation. Reality itself suffers from liberal bias. Find out more at liberalbias.com. Today's new member of the day is Lisa DeFalco. Lisa DeFalco, thank you for being a David Pakman Show member. For the next 48 hours, this is it, Lewis, 48 hours remain in the David Pakman Show 5-day-a-week membership special. This week, we expand to 5 shows per week, and you can get a free David Pakman Show t-shirt with your yearly membership at today's rates. But you have to go to davidpakman.com/5daysnow. That's the number 5 days now. davidpakman.com/5daysnow. 48 hours left. Today is Wednesday, and it is time for Hatriot Mail.
If Ayn Rand and Ronald Reagan had a baby and suckled that child off the teat of liberty, its cries would sound a little something like Hatriot Mail. Written by patriots who hate David Pakman. Because America. And because freedom.
Okay, so we finally have this week the episode of Hatriot Mail that I thought we were going to be playing last week. There was just a little bit of confusion, and I think that we have to just play this one with absolutely no explanation first, and then we'll discuss it. Listen to this incredibly patriotic Hatriot Mail.
Thumbing through channels on my satellite TV today, I stumbled upon your silly little show. Your idiotics prompted me to look you up online, being as I've never heard of you before. Question was, how can anyone condone welfare recipients having to take drug tests?
Right.
Answer, I have 3 to take a drug test to work. That is my money the welfare recipients are receiving. I worked for it. This country is not a communist country, nor is it a socialist country. If you don't like living in this country, get the hell out of it. Your show is on Free Speech TV. People fought and died for your free speech with guns. You are an educated idiot, like the rest of the Marxist, socialist, communist idiots. Get out of my country if you don't like it.
I don't even know where to start, Lewis, because this one is just riddled with so much insanity. I mean, there's the "Get Out of My Country" meme, which is a popular one amongst the right. There's the "People fought for your free speech with guns, but then they tried to get me off the air so that I no longer am able to speak." Of course, that wouldn't be the government shutting me down. It would be, I guess, right-wing nuts. I don't know that we can really put together a cogent response because it's just so all over the place. It's the Gish Gallop.
It is the Gish Gallop, and it's great. It does make for a great Hatriot Mail segment.
Hey, Rush Limbaugh decided that he didn't like what CNN anchor Don Lemon said about his comments related to, what was it related to Donald Sterling, that he just decided to make fun of Don Lemon for being gay. I mean, it doesn't even get, sometimes the right will try to create very specific, and they'll say, oh, I've got the moral argument against homosexuality, or I have the medical argument against homosexuality, or the religious one, or the natural argument. Rush Limbaugh's not doing any of that. He's just basically making fun of Don Lemon because he's a gay man. And Rush Limbaugh said that Clippers owner Donald Sterling was in trouble because of the racist remarks he made because he hadn't donated enough money to President Obama. So CNN anchor Don Lemon, who is a gay man, said that Rush Limbaugh is just a stunt king. He's just saying stuff to get attention. So then Rush Limbaugh said this about Don Lemon. A very well-crafted rebuttal, isn't it? Take a listen to this.
Over at CNN, they interpreted that to mean that I was defending Sterling. How did they get there? I don't know how they get there. Aaron Burnett played the soundbite and then went to Mr. Black Hole himself, Don Lemon, who sleeps with men, proudly, for comment, and this is what he said.
Right, so then he plays the comment from Don Lemon, which I already read to you. Does this really appeal, Rush Limbaugh, as one of the strongest voices in the Republican Party, regardless of whether individual right-wingers will email me saying Rush Limbaugh doesn't speak for them? There is no denying right now that Rush Limbaugh is one of the most powerful voices for the American right wing in the United States. Just making fun of someone because they're gay, right? At least have the decency, and I say this jokingly, at least have the decency to come up with one of your absurd moral, religious, or other arguments against homosexuality.
This is exactly the type of thing that got him to the top of his game, David. He's been doing this for years. You remember when he started making fun of how Chinese sounds?
Yeah.
Like how Mandarin sounds? He went for like a few minutes. He just started acting like a 3-year-old spewing fake Chinese. This is what Rush does, and he is a stunt king. And this is what got him popular. This is what got him famous.
Republican Congressman Steve Hickey is not only a South Dakota congressman, he's also a pastor at the Church of the Gate in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. He's co-sponsored a bunch of anti-gay measures in the state house, and now he's on a campaign to warn people about the dangers of anal sex, which is the obsession of so-called pro-family anti-gay men. Not much of a discussion of lesbians very often, not much of a discussion of heterosexual couples that may choose to engage in anal sex, just an obsession with gay men. I don't know what that means. We've explored that in the past. That's not the subject today. He also thinks, Steve Hickey thinks, that homosexuality has been the downfall of past civilizations. And he wrote this, he did a video interview with the Argus leader following up an op-ed he wrote for a local paper. And in this video, which we're not going to play because typically local newspapers and local TV stations are very aggressive about copyright stuff. So even though I think we would be within fair use to use the video, we just don't even want to deal with that. So I'll tell you what he said. And he was responding to a physician named Dr. Kevin Wayland, who called Hickey's warnings about homosexuality not only hurtful, but entirely wrong. So Congressman Steve Hickey says, and here's what I'd like to ask Dr. Wayland. Do you tell your patients to wash their hands before they eat? Why? Because you touch a doorknob and you don't want it to get inside your body. I hesitate to get crude again, but Dr. Wayland, is it okay for 8 of your friends that you're in love with to take a dump in your bed and then you can sleep in it all year long? Now, the most shocking thing about this, Lewis, is for a pro-family guy like Steve Hickey, most people would never even think of using doorknobs in a sexual way, but Steve Hickey is apparently all over that.
David, this is one guy. I would love to see this guy's browser history.
Okay, maybe he's been visiting some German websites. I don't know. I don't know what kind of parties Steve Hickey goes to, but this isn't really sounding like homosexuality is even connected with the stuff he's talking about.
I'm not sure what he's talking about. It's definitely perverse. It's definitely obscene, and it definitely fascinates him. And let's keep our eye on this guy. I think we're going to see great things from him.
And again, what about lesbians? If your problem is with homosexuality at its core, what about lesbians? These anti-gay religious guys seem fixated on male gay sex, and I could say I will never understand why. Sometimes we've come to understand why their fixation is on that, but it seems to be the common thread that runs through it. It's just truly amazing. Join us on Facebook, facebook.com/David Pakman Show. Next, we will talk to Brian Wansink from Cornell's Food and Drug Lab. I think you'll really like this interview.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
I'm joined today by Professor Brian Wansink, who teaches marketing in the Dyson School of Applied Economics and Management at Cornell University. Also author of the book Slim by Design and the bestseller Mindless Eating: Why We Eat More Than We Think. Also former executive director of the USDA Center for Nutrition Policy and Promotion. So before we get started, Professor, how did you get into this topic generally of consumer behavior around food?
You know, I grew up in Iowa, and when I was a little boy, I used to sell vegetables door to door. And one of the things I ended up finding was that it wasn't demographics, or it wasn't income, or it wasn't even knowledge that ended up determining whether you like vegetables or not. But it was we couldn't figure it out. And that this is amazing because you can take two identical houses door to door. One would buy all the vegetables I had in my little wagon, and the other would look at me like I was carrying kryptonite. And I thought, this is really cool. Why? There's some unexplainable variation in what we eat, what we like, and how much we eat that I think is largely explained by psychology and by the environment around us.
So to give people a sense of some of the things you've worked on, the Food and Brand Lab is credited with working on research that shows smaller dinner plates mean people eat less. People in general seem to eat 92% of whatever amount they serve themselves. The average person makes about 250 food-related decisions a day. Low-fat labels mean people eat more calories. The nutritional gatekeeper in the family influences about 3/4 of what the family eats. People put more beverages into short, wide glasses than tall ones. So before we dig into some of these specifics, I talk to a lot of picky eaters. I know a lot of picky eaters. Generally, they tend to say the one constant is they say when they were younger, they ate very limited diets. And I don't know if that also aligns with the not eating as many vegetables. The picky eaters I know it does. Do you find that this lack of variety growing up is a big factor in people not eating as healthy or not eating as many vegetables when they're older?
I mean, you cannot believe the power of what happens when you wear a little gooblet. Okay, so there was a study a while back. This is actually one we didn't do, but it was a study where they took pregnant women in their third trimester, 6 to 9 months. What they did is they gave them carrot juice to drink every day, or they gave them water to drink every day. Okay, and what they did is after they gave birth, 3 months later, they give their little gooblets, the little babies, this little porridge or cereal, and it was carrot flavored. What they found is the kids whose moms had even drank carrot juice when they were pregnant with the kid ended up eating a lot more of this porridge than those who hadn't. I mean, the amazing thing is that when you're a very young kid, you're fairly, you explore things a lot. And basically most kids grab anything within arm's length and put in their mouth. And if you're a parent who wants your kids to eat better, just take anything you're eating, put it on a little tray in front of your kids, and what you'll find is they'll end up growing to have a lot more of a wide range of tastes when they grow up, and they're not just going to like white foods and pizza.
So along these same lines, we recently talked about, I don't know if you saw this study around so-called clean your plate parenting, right? The idea that parents tell their kids, you got to clean your plate before you can leave the table. And there's a significant correlation between parents who do that and children who eventually are obese in their adult lives. At the same time, this is not that uncommon of a parenting technique, right? The idea that you don't want to encourage behavior where kids are leaving food, even though it might be because their body is sending them signs that they're full, that they don't want to eat anymore. In the research you've done, what's your analysis of this clean your plate parenting style?
This is really, really cool. So, food is one area where kids kind of have some latitude in their during the day. And we did this study a while back. I really like it. We call it the Clean Plate Club, not surprisingly. But one of the things we did is we took little kids, 4-year-old kids, and what we did is we sent a questionnaire home with their parents. I asked about 20 questions, 19 of which we could care less about. One of them that we were really interested in was, to what extent do you insist your child clean his plate?
Right.
Okay. It could be like a 1 or 2 or 3. They could have circled it as a 9-point scale. They could have circled 1, 2, or 3. Which was like, well, I don't care. They can do whatever they want. Or like 7, 8s, or 9s mean, yeah, by gosh, I make them clean their plate. But what we did the next day when they brought the little questionnaire back is we set them up. We gave them dessert, not dessert, but we gave them well, it's Fruit Loops actually, and we let them have as much Fruit Loops as they wanted for breakfast that day. We found that kids whose parents insisted they clean their plate, what do you think they did? Do you think they poured more Fruit Loops or they poured less Fruit Loops?
I don't know if I would say that they poured more or less, but I would guess the clean your plate kids ultimately ate more one way or another.
Yeah, that's interesting because what happens is that here you have a kid who, when he's at home, he's got no control over his food environment because his parents are going, eat, or do this, do this, do this, do this. And so the thing they do, the second they have food freedom, is they just go hog wild, so to speak. We found they poured about 44% more cereal than kids whose parents said, yeah, if you don't want to eat it, you don't have to eat it.
So when we talk about the parenting influence, when we talk about the disproportionate availability of cheap processed food, which is less healthy, we kind of have this perfect storm of factors right now that are contributing in general, we could say, at least in many parts of the country, to less healthy eating and more obesity. If you had to say what's the one really specific change that could be made that would have the biggest impact overall on child obesity, obesity overall, have you narrowed down what's the one thing? I mean, we can identify so many problems, but it's harder to think of solutions.
Yeah, I mean, all our lab, all the Cornell Food and Brand Lab does research that all has a solution at the end of it. Because, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of whiny people out there pointing out the problems, but what we need are solutions. Well, one of the things we found in this particular case is that, like it or not, the nutritional gatekeeper of the home, this is the person who either purchases or prepares the majority of food, they control 72% of what their family eats. Now, it's for the better if they have a fruit bowl instead of a candy dish, okay? It's for the better if they go to a restaurant that actually has a salad instead of just big fried blooming onions. It's for the better if they give their kid a little snack pack to take to school instead of giving them a couple bucks and taking a drag on the cigarette. Okay, and if parents could realize that they can't control everything their kid does and everything their kid eats, but they control almost 3/4 of it. If parents could realize this, first of all, they wouldn't feel resigned. And I think they would shape up a little bit more and act a little bit better as role models. That's the one big change that I think could transform the way people eat.
But so let's talk about that, because recently, July 1st, some of these junk food and school bans go into effect, right? And when we talked about this on our program, I'm very aware of the fact that there are far more significant problems with our education system. Math and science scores are down in the toilet. We've got in the South textbooks being rewritten to include stuff that's totally non-scientific. There are bigger fish to fry when it comes to education than junk food. But at the same time, as you talk about the importance of parents guiding their kids' diets because of the impact it has later in life, isn't it valuable to reduce the amount of junk food kids have access to? Is there not some value to that? And I ask it not rhetorically. I really don't know the answer.
The one thing we need to realize is that, there's a great experiment. I don't think there should be vending machines in schools, but I think there should be indulgence in schools. Now, I'll give you an example. So the LA Unified School District a while back ended up changing their menu. They took everything off that was, got rid of chocolate milk or cookies or things like this. So I think they left tofu and kale. Yeah. And so I got this call from this writer from the LA Times a while back and goes, hey, the data's in. Guess what happened over a year after doing this? I'm like, everybody stopped eating there. And she goes, how did you know? and that's what we need to worry about. If we just transform all the school to make it all tofu and kale, the problem is people are going to stop eating. If they stop eating school lunches, what we found and what others have found, 3 out of 4 kids who bring their lunches from home or who buy it on the way or whatever eat worse than the kid who eats the worst school lunch available. So what we believe the solution is, we started something called the Smarter Lunchroom Movement. You can go to smarterlunchrooms.org. And what we do is we figured out what are behavioral solutions, some of them psychological, some of them behavioral economics. It can be done in schools to get little gooblets to pick up the apple instead of the cookie, the whole while thinking it was their own volition that made them do it. And we find simply, it's a scorecard with 100 things that you can do. But one thing we found is simply taking a fruit bowl, for instance, and instead of having your fruit in this nasty chafer pan, put it in a fruit bowl and put it next to the cash register, increases fruit sales by 105%.
Wow.
Okay. Giving a name to a vegetable, calling it like crunchy carrots instead of just carrots, or power peas instead of like peas, ends up increasing sales by about 30%. So these small changes you can make.
Wow, that's truly incredible. It's amazing. Well, I encourage everybody to check out the work that's being done at the Dyson School of Applied Economics and Management at Cornell University. We've been speaking with Professor Brian Wansink, and you can check out his book, Slim by Design, and also Mindless Eating. Is Slim by Design out now? When we first emailed you about an interview, it was forthcoming, but I don't know if it's now out because it's been a while.
Yeah, it's September 23rd it's coming out. So you can go to the website, slimbydesign.org.
All right, remember, smaller dinner plates. That we know for sure. The science seems clear about that. Thanks so much for doing the interview.
Yeah, you bet. Good to talk to you.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Remember to join us on Reddit to chat with us, suggest stories for the show, chat with other viewers, etc. Go to davidpakman.com/Reddit. That's REDDIT. A 3-year-old shot himself in the head. The grandmother says, hey, accidents happen. A 3-year-old Milwaukee boy is in critical condition after shooting himself with a gun that he found in the glove compartment of his mother's car. It happened after Kevin Donald's family returned from a shopping trip, according to WITI. While adults weren't looking, Kevin got a hold of the unsecured and loaded gun and shot himself in the head. Police are still investigating. They say it appears to be an accident, a tragic one, and no arrests have been made. A tragic accident. Of course, someone is legally responsible for that gun, and we're talking about a minor, so this is negligence. Brittany Petersick, who's the boy's aunt, said that she and the boy's mother were moving a television inside their house when they heard the shot. She thinks Kevin went back to the car and started playing with the gun. The grandmother, Jane Triplett, said he thought it was a toy, like we say. Accidents happen, and this was one of the times that it was a major accident. She seems somewhat casual, but an unsecured loaded gun isn't really an accident, right? It's negligence and irresponsible gun ownership. Accidents do happen. This happens to be completely preventable, right? If there was not an unsecured loaded gun where a 3-year-old could have access to it.
Yeah, complete negligence. We just keep hearing about these horror stories, and I hope the kid pulls through. There needs to be some type of sentence. There needs to be some type of criminal charge here for this.
And this isn't about over criminalization, right, Lewis? But it's about legal responsibility. You have a minor, and you have the gun that is the legal responsibility of its owner. If you have an unsecured loaded gun and a minor who is in parental custody is able to get that and shoot themselves, should not there be some responsibility for the negligent act?
Right, and set a precedent. Let people know that it's not okay to have your firearms negligently discharged or avoid these instances altogether. I mean, it's a shame that that people would probably respond more strongly to it if they knew there were a criminal charge, as opposed to just thinking that there probably won't be an accident and getting away with it if there is.
Yeah, and if you look at some of the comments online for news articles related to this story, people are saying, hey, you can't blame her for having the gun loaded and easily accessible. I mean, what's the point of having the gun if it's not loaded and you can't get to it quickly? That's exactly what you need. And with that line of reasoning, we're just never going to make any progress on fixing the gun problem we have in this country. Last week, Lewis, unbeknownst to himself, created an amazing portmanteau, a combination of the words feverish and fervent. And the word he created is feverent. We went back and found the clip, and Kurt Washington wrote to me, and he actually tweeted to us, and he said, I was feverent when I watched the David Pakman show today. This is the clip of Lewis creating a new word last week.
It seems like the only people who are going to vote for Rand Paul are that small libertarian section of the Republican Party, and they're very passionate and fervent, and they support him with every fiber of their being. But
this is brilliant, Lewis. I mean, it was just kind of like a little slip of the tongue, but the word makes perfect sense. It's a combination of feverish and fervent, and I hope somebody can go and create the word on Urban Dictionary and actually cite you as the creator of the word.
That would be great. It'll make me even more famous, David. It's not even that funny a portmanteau, though. It's not like penis and tweet with the Anthony Weiner scandal. We had tweenus.
Well, we had tweenus, and we had wait a second. We also had twunk, right? Tweeting your junk.
Yeah, now that's funny. This is not funny. This is it's actually a bit more logical, but
it's perfectly
whatever.
Logical.
If it gets in there, I'll be happy with it.
All right, so there it is, feverent. It's kind of like to refudiate. It's nobody has refudiated Lewis's use of the word feverent thus far, and for that we can all be thankful. Let's go to your voicemails. We have a voicemail number, 219-2DAVID-P. It's open 24 hours a day. I'm going to play one of the craziest voicemails we've ever received, and it's crazy because it really runs the gamut in terms of absolutely outrageous ideas. I'll play it for you. Be prepared, ladies and gentlemen.
David Pakman. Well, I was just thinking that if you're really that concerned about 200 Nigerian women,
right,
who are usually one of the most unattractive women there are in the world, maybe you, Anton, and Lewis there can take up a little collection and buy a couple and do what these Christian groups and sponsor and bring in all these foreigners and third world people to America.
Okay.
Or better yet, since China, males are having a hard time finding wives because of the one-child policy has pretty much eradicated Chinese females, put in a drive where China can buy some of these women, Nigerian women, as spouses for Chinese males. Who cares about these Nigerian women? Most of them are probably relatives of these Boko Haram Islamic radicals who probably took them because they don't want them to have a brainwashing Western education.
Yeah.
That states that women are equal and obviously they are inferior. They can't do hard jobs and stuff.
Okay. So we have in this one voicemail, in this minute and a half voicemail, we have the assertions that Nigerian women are the ugliest women in the world. We have a reference to Anton, who is, of course, Natan, who hasn't been on this program for the better part of a year at this point. We have the concept of buying women. We have the concept also, Lewis, of course, that what was the last thing? There's just so much of this. Let me just replay that last part. What was that last bit?
Education that states that women are...
Oh, right. That women are inferior to men, which of course they are. I don't think we've ever had an email that contained so much insanity, or a voicemail.
Well, I would imagine that when you get an email from a Boko Haram sympathizer, it would be crazy, and it was.
On today's bonus show, Sony unveils a cassette tape that holds over 64 million songs, California 8th graders and their Holocaust assignment, and Duff Beer, the beer of The Simpsons, launches in Australia. How do you get the bonus show? Very easy. Go to davidpakman.com/membership, or for the next 48 hours, get a free t-shirt with that yearly membership at davidpakman.com/5daysnow. Talk to you on the bonus show.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.